All right, good evening, fellas. Like Brandon said, we are going to start a new series tonight. It's called Pursuit. And during this series, we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to talk about what it looks like to share your faith. We're going to talk about effective time spent in the Word, effective time spent in prayer, silence and solitude, which is kind of hard for guys sometimes, pushing aside distractions. We're going to talk about worship, why it's important to worship. We're going to talk about money, even though Taylor talked about it yesterday. We're going to hit it again later. Managing your time, mentorship, accountability, stewardship, all of these to help answer one question. And that one question we're going to get to in just a second. But first, I want to share the verse that this whole series is based off of, and it's Jeremiah 29:13. And this is what it says. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with your heart. With all your heart. This verse, now, if you put it in context, it's God's promise to the people of Judah and of Israel. But the principle that God will draw near to those who draw near to him is a universal truth. If you look at James 4:8, it says that draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Everyone in this world is seeking something or someone. Some of us are seeking pleasure. Some of us are seeking fame or recognition or status. Some are seeking a soulmate. Yet others are seeking things that can harm them. And sometimes they won't even know that it's harming them, or sometimes they do know it's going to harm them, but the pleasure outweighs the potential pain later. Everybody's seeking something, but where does God mix in all of that? Because there's two kinds of seekers. There's the self-seeker and the God-seeker. The self-seeker says that seeks things for personal gain. It's all about them. It's all about their desires, their purposes, their pleasures. Everything they do is for themselves. But then there's the God-seeker who seeks God above everything else. Everything they do is for the glory of God, wanting to please him and wanting him to actually be the one that's high and lifted up. So knowing that, we all have to wrestle with the same question. What kind of seeker am I? What kind of seeker are you? And it probably switches every once in a while, but mostly, where do you land? So over the next several weeks, including tonight, we're going to talk about various ways that we can seek God, where we can prioritize God and pursue God with more intentionality so we can effectively and intentionally answer one simple question. And the question is this: how can I be a godly man? That's the question we're going to go over for the next several weeks. How can I be a godly man? And that is the question that the answer is actually really simple. But there's different ways that we can go about doing it. But the answer is simply to be the man that God has called you to be. We need to spend more time learning to become more like Jesus than listening to the opinions of the world of who a godly man is. Because what's happening, and we're seeing it more and more, that the opinions of the world of a godly man is simply, we don't need that. We don't want that anymore. That doesn't have any value. And the thing is we don't need permission from the culture to pursue Jesus. You also don't need a theology degree to be devoted to Christ. You want to be more like Jesus, that can only come from a radical pursuit of a godly life. And a radical pursuit of a godly life comes from a radical pursuit of God himself. And allow him to speak to you and then to have the courage and the discipline to live out what he's sharing with you. There's a quote that says, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be, just be one." And if you don't pursue God and have him for yourself specifically answer the question for you, how can I be a godly man? Then what's going to happen is the culture, the world, and other people are going to try to define that for you. And then when you go to God to try to get the answer, he's going to communicate something very different. And then that's where confusion comes in. Modern society is so at war right now with itself because it can't even decide what the definition of a man is. let alone what a healthy, godly man is. That's why it's vital what we're doing here tonight. It's why it's vital that we show up at Upward Men and actually learn this stuff and live this stuff out. Because every one of you here, you're leaders. You're leaders of families. Some of you are leaders of ministries. You're leaders at your work. And as leaders, it's vital for us to pursue God and let Him be the one that defines you. Then live it out, because the world needs to see something different from a Christian man than what the world is seeing now. The danger, and here's the danger, is that we could proclaim one thing but live something very different. The danger and tragedy is when the world sees the same thing from a Christian man that it does from a worldly man. And the truth is, it's very, very simple. It's how you live your life is what you believe. How you live is actually what you believe. Everything else is just talk. Everything else is just lip service. And the danger is that was when Christian men have the opinions that are stronger than their character. We can have godly opinions, godly thoughts, but then don't live it out. That's why our opinions are stronger than our character. And they could talk, and you can then judge others, and then we can live like everybody else. And for those men, we have to be careful, because a lot of times there's a discipline of the need to close your mouth and so your character can catch up. Because that's what happens is when you proclaim one thing, then there's so many eyes on you. So what are they catching? What are they seeing? Does your character need to catch up to your rhetoric, to your talk? Because talk is cheap, but growth is costly. Spiritual growth costs you something. Judging other people's lives, that's easy. But doing the deep work of looking internally and then defeating your own self-destructing behaviors, that's war. God's calling us to go to war. Be the man that God is calling you to be. If you have a vision for what a godly man should be, then be one. If you have a godly vision for what a good dad should be, then be that. If you have a godly vision of what a good friend should be a good friend. If you have a godly vision of what a loving husband should be, then go be a loving husband. If you have a vision of what a provider is, a patriarch is, a hardworking man is, then go be that. Silence the argument of culture. That is our role, is to silence the argument of culture about having a godly manhood, what that is. Because they're saying, we don't need you. We don't want you. You're not tolerant. And I think it's time for us to silence the arguments that the culture is having about godly manhood in your life. Let your life define that. How you live is what you believe. Everything else is just talk. Your life is your argument for godliness. And that's a lot of pressure. You open up the Word, you're going to find a lot of things in the Bible that talks about the responsibilities of being a godly man. That's some weight to carry. Embrace it. Don't run away from it. Don't start praying for a lighter load. Start praying for a stronger back. Embrace the responsibility that God is calling you to go and do. Jeremiah 29:13, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. You want a stronger back? Pursue God. You want a stronger back? Seek after God. Search intentionally for Him. And if you do that with all your heart, you are going to find Him. Now, I have a sad, heartbreaking story that I'm going to share with you. When my wife and I first got married, we were very poor. I had to sell my motorcycle. I had to sell my PlayStation. I had to sell all my toys that probably got us to the poorhouse to begin with. We lived in a small place, had no garage. So because I had no garage, we had to rent a small storage unit. And anything that wasn't regularly used on a daily basis had to go in that storage unit. One morning, Brandy was sitting on the couch, and there was a kid show on TV because Nicole was young, and she read that there was some break-ins at the storage unit where we had our stuff. The robbers only got a handful of storage units. There wasn't very many out of the abundance that they had. So we weren't that concerned, but we drove over there anyway just to check to make sure that ours wasn't one of them. Guess what happened? Ours was one of them. Now, I tell you that to tell you this. I have a 21-year-old son. He's a lot like his dad. And one thing that he has inherited from me was the love of a great rock and roll band, Kiss. And you know what else he's into is something that his dad was also into, and now getting into again because I'm starting to catch the fever from him, is collecting vinyl records. Guess what was stolen out of the locker room? All my vinyl records, and I had every Kiss album, originals, back from the 70s. I collected them all. Now, I bring this up because just Saturday, he and I, and his wife and my wife and Nicole went to, we decided to tell the girls that we'd like to go garage sailing and maybe a little antiquing, which the girls were excited for, but we had ulterior motives. We're going record shopping. So we hit the garage sales and we hit the antique stores and we hit the record stores trying to find this elusive Kiss albums because they're hard to find, and when you do, they're not cheap anymore. So when we find one, we tell each other, we've been doing this for about a month now. Our goal is to get every single one. One copy, original, from every Kiss album made. We have a couple. We've had a little bit of luck, but not a lot. But when we find one, we tell each other. We've got a text thread about it. We're researching, we're seeking them out, we're talking about it. We're spending money and time trying to find these overly priced, expensive masterpieces to add to our collection. And we're also planning our next strategy on how we can get the next ones because some of them are harder to find than others. Our wives are getting very, very tired of us. And they would say that we may be devoted to this. We're having a good time. And the point is, there's nothing wrong with having a good time and having some hobbies. But I am seeking for these Kiss records and hoping to find them. But there's no guarantee that I'm going to find what I'm seeking for. God says, if you seek me, you will find me. When you seek me with all your heart. Guys, we can't complain about the silence of God if we continually live distracted lives. And if we're being honest, maybe uninterested about the things of God. And to be real, I'm coming off a very dry week. Very dry spell last week. It felt difficult to pray. It wasn't a bad week. Just sometimes, you guys all been there, sometimes it's just hard to get into the routine with the Lord. It was difficult to pray. It was difficult to get in the Word. It was difficult to worship. The most difficult thing to do was actually write this message today. There are times when you hit a dry spell, but you persevere because you don't want the devil to get a foothold. But I wish I could say that was my story last week, but it wasn't. It felt difficult to pray, get in the Word. And last week, praise the Lord, it's not always like this. The difficulty beat me. That doesn't mean I didn't read the Bible once in a while or pray a little bit, but it wasn't with the same intentionality. It wasn't with the same frequency. It wasn't with the same desire that I genuinely have. But you know who loves a Christian man in a dry spell? Charles Spurgeon says it this: if you are not seeking the Lord, the devil is seeking you. Can't wait until we get attacked by the enemy to show some urgency for God. A good reason here to put God as a priority in your life. In order to really find God, this verse is saying that we must seek Him with all of our hearts. That means there's nothing really casual about a relationship with God. We can't casually just try to seek God a little bit here and a little bit there and expect to actually find him. We've got to dive deep. We've got to seek him with some intentionality, with everything that we have in order to really find him and to really get to know him. And this type of seeking doesn't just happen on Sunday morning. It doesn't just happen on a Monday night. It doesn't happen if you open your Bible once in a while. This happens when you intentionally lay aside other things and place all your focus on finding him. And when you do that, you're going to find the breakthrough. That means that when you're with God, you're with God. It's not that God is holding out. And he's not just saying, well, I'm only going to reveal myself to you if I see you seeking me enough. But this verse is simply saying that our hearts were never designed to be able to focus on several things at once. We've all been there, distracted Bible reading, distracted praying, distracted worship. It's hard to find God in that. We have to choose to place our focus on one thing and one thing alone. And when you do that, the Bible says you're going to find God. There are people, and we all know them, that don't believe in God. There's people we've been praying for, people that we love and care for that don't believe in God or don't like God. And I can guarantee most of them have tried seeking God, but they didn't find him. And then that's frustrating because the scripture says it says in the word that if you try to find him, if you seek him, you'll find him. So why are there so many who do not believe in God? Because their hearts were not connected to the seeking. Gentlemen, our hearts have to be connected to the seeking. Don't just mark a box. Because anybody can pray. Anybody can read a Bible. But I challenge you, even during the dry spells, to seek God with all your heart. Seek him and as if there is no tomorrow. Seek him as he might be coming back tomorrow. Seek him with some urgency, and if the Bible is true, and I believe it is, you're going to find him. So what are some steps? How do you pursue God? Number one, you got to dedicate intentional time each day for seeking him. One of the things that I've learned long ago is if you don't make time for God, you're not going to have time for God. And we make time for the things that are important in our life. So we have to intentionally carve out a time in our calendar. And it can be a bigger chunk. It could be spread out during the day, however it works for you. But you have to be intentionally have time for God in your daily life. And when you do that, you want to set aside time for worship. And set aside time for prayer. Set aside some time for studying of his word. And then you got to create a space where you could focus on him without distraction. The Bible calls it a prayer closet. Maybe for you, it's in your car. Maybe it's in a room in your house. Maybe you have to drive somewhere and just go to the lake or the mountains or whatever. But where can you go consistently that you're going to have some undistracted time with the Lord? And what's going to happen, the Bible says, is you're going to find him. 5 benefits when you pursue God. The speed of your spiritual growth increases. We all have desire for spiritual growth. We all want to grow spiritually. The second is your prayer life becomes more satisfying, more intimate. You actually start not only praying to God, but you hear from God. Number 3, you no longer worry. How much worry goes on in your life? If you're seeking God and finding him, the worry goes away. Faith becomes a way of life. And you receive more revelation. You hear from the Lord. So this goes back to our original question. If we just leave those up for a second. How can I become a godly man? You need to be the man that God has called you to be. And look at the benefits on the screen. Do you think the world, do you think your church, do you think your family, your business, your friends would value from a godly man who's continuing to grow spiritually? Look at the people in your life, the people that God has called you to lead, to steward, to care for. Would they be blessed by a godly man who has an intentional and intimate prayer life? Do you think the world, the culture, the county here, your church, your family, your workplace, your friends would benefit from seeing a godly man who no longer worries, but their confidence is in God? What about a man whose faith is his compass? A godly man is someone that people want to follow. And lastly, do you think the world, your church, your wife and kids, everyone in your life and those around you would be blessed by having you be a man of God, able to hear directly from the Lord? Would that bring peace and confidence in the people that God has called you to lead? Be the man that God has called you to be. When you seek him and you find him, you could be a man of spiritual growth, a man of prayer, a man of peace, a man of faith, and a man who's directed by God. This is being a man that God has called you to be. And you get that by being a man who will pursue and seek after God. Every time I talk about my life in sermon illustrations, I realize how patient my wife is. And so I'm going to tell you another one. About 5 years ago, I lost my wedding ring. My third wedding ring. So when we bought this ring, this last ring, my wife says, if you lose this one, you're getting a tattoo. So this being my third ring, when I lost it, slight panic attack. And I spent hours, for days, looking for this thing. Every day, for days, trying to find this ring. And at the same time, having my left hand in my pocket around Brandy often, right? Which is a little awkward. About a month and a half later, I found it when I was reaching for a golf tee in my golf bag. Now, I spent hours looking for that ring. Days looking for that ring, praying that I would find this ring. Now, if I'd have lost my favorite pen, if I'd have lost $5 bill on the ground, if I would have lost even my sunglasses, I wouldn't have looked that long or that hard. The time and effort you spend looking for something shows how much you value it. If the item that you are seeking has lots of value to you, you are going to diligently search and search and search until you find it. If it's not that important to you, you're not going to look very hard. Having said that, how important is God to you? A.W. Tozer said in his book, God's Pursuit of Man, the man who would know God must give time to him. So there's a challenge for us, challenge for me, challenge for you guys. How much time are you willing to give God? How can you intentionally pursue God this week so you can better become the man that God has called each one of you individually to be? That's the challenge. So we have some table questions, and before we get to the tables, I want to go over question 2 and 3 real quick. Question 2, James 4:8 says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. How can you intentionally draw near to God this week? That's the challenge that we're leaving you with. But after everyone is answered, I want you to pick someone at the table that you can keep accountable with. Find someone at the table that's willing to check in on you this week. How are you doing with it? I know table leads check in with your guys with prayer, stuff like that, but find one person that you're willing to say, yeah, I'm struggling this week, or yeah, I'm doing pretty good, and this is how I can intentionally seek God this week, and I'm doing pretty good. Just encourage each other. And then the third question, if the question is, how can I be a godly man, and the answer, be the man that God has called you to be, what has God called you to be? I want to change the end of that. Instead of what has God called you to be, what kind of man has God called you to be? because it's going to be very similar for a lot of us. I want to be a man of prayer. I want to be a man of the word. I want to be a man that's directed by God. But I want to hear more about what has God called you specifically to be. For me, it's God is calling me to take a patriotic position in my family that used to be held by my dad. He has lost that position. Now I have to do that. I have to care for my mom. I have to lead my family. There's some things that God is calling me. There's some things that God is calling you specifically to do, to be the man that God has called you to be. So I want you to unpack that a little bit too. Start thinking about that and talk about that. And then we'll leave the last one. How can we pray for you? Pray for each other. And then we'll gather here at 8 o'clock. All right, let's get started.